Y'all won't believe this shit, right? I pulled up at my little people's house and shit, right? So now when I go there, I knock on the door. They like, they ain't there. They ain't answering the door. So son tell me, just like, I know a bitch looking at me through the peephole. So I twist the peephole off. You feel me? The little peephole. I twist that bitch off. When I twist that bitch off, right? I look in there. I'm like, man, I see your ass right there. They hide. I should have poked their ass in the eye.
What you are looking at right now is the result of a rap beef that ran for over a decade in Broward County, Florida, and ended with two mothers shot dead in broad daylight, neither of whom had anything to do with the violence surrounding their sons.
Man, you heard me, rich fucking shooters, man. Pew, pew, pew. Hit a nigga all day, you heard me. Pew, 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 pew. 3 a.m.
Sniper gang! Sniper gang!
One was ambushed in the hallway outside her own salon. The other was killed sitting in her van in her own driveway. And the men responsible were celebrating both murders on Instagram and Telegram while their victims' families were still planning the funerals.
Everybody want to be streets, either want to be hood.
Even police say they raised in the hood. You weren't raised in the motherfucking thing
Cause you would, you'll be out here doing the same old thing.
Matter of fact, you were raised in your motherfucking house.
With your mama supervision hand, shot side, 5-5.
That's the sound of the nightmare.
By the time federal investigators finally closed in, there were 8 murders, 19 attempted murders, a 16-year-old charged as an adult, and a 5-year-old caught in the middle of a drive-by. This is how it all started.
A Fort Lauderdale home standing quiet Thursday. The shades pulled down and the driveway empty. But only hours earlier, it was a crime scene. According to police, just after 6 p.m. Wednesday, officers responded to reports of a shooting at this home on Northwest 30th Way near 21st Street and found a woman in the front seat of a van in her own driveway.
To understand what happened to those two mothers, you have to go back to 2011 and a nightclub on the border of two neighborhoods that had never really gotten along. On one side, you have Dania Beach, a small, tight-knit community that covers barely 13 streets, where a young rapper named Psycho Bob, born Cambrell Smart, was growing up around a crowd that would eventually become one of the most violent gangs in South Florida. On the other side, you have Hollywood and Liberia, the rival neighborhood just down the road, home to a rapper named HMT Trey, born Trayvon Key, who was building his own crew and his own reputation.
Live it loud, that's it. Live it loud, that's it. My real brother.
These two neighborhoods, two men, and the people around them would spend the next 13 years locked in a cycle of retaliation so relentless and so personal that it eventually ran out of combatants to target and started consuming the people those combatants loved most.
I ain't gonna lie, it's to eat the lap up with no hands for me.
It all started with a robbery. Briscoe, whose real name is British Alexander Mitchell, was a Miami rapper who had been making real noise in the late 2000s. He had put out tracks with Lil Wayne, including a song called In the Hood, and his profile was rising in a way that made him recognizable on the streets. That same visibility made him a target. In late 2011, Briscoe was robbed at a venue called Wars Lounge, a spot sitting right on the border between Dania Beach and Hollywood, the kind of neutral ground where people from both neighborhoods crossed paths. Street accounts pointed to an 18-year-old from Dania Beach named Eric Hunter as the man behind it, though no formal charges were ever filed for the robbery itself. What mattered was what came next.
Come on.
Yeah.
Oh. Come on, man. You talking all that shit?
Come on, bring your ass up.
Come on.
A 20-year-old from Hollywood named Dijon Brown allegedly shared what he knew about Hunter's role in that robbery with people who passed it back to Hunter. On the street, that is called snitching, and in the world these men occupied, it carried a death sentence. On December 10, 2011, Dijon Brown was fatally shot multiple times at a street party on Phippen Road near Wars Lounge at around 1:30 in the morning in front of a crowd. Witnesses identified Eric Hunter as the shooter. The two men had been acquaintances, close enough that Brown's mother later told reporters Hunter had stayed in their home, that she had known him personally and never imagined he was capable of this.
Brian kind of nigga, man, fuck this New York shit up right quick. Tired in there, find there, what you doing? ATV shit, back door wide open, you know what I'm saying? Cut no business, cut no deal, go that the boss on top. All in New York with it, man, like, all in New York with it. Oh, yeah, you want to lay back, you know? You won't never catch me at no damn airport, nigga. Real rich nigga. From the PJs to the PJs, you know what I'm saying? I don't really pump my shit like that. Like, trust me, I'm shit popping till I die. You want to lay back in the main bag. That's my brother's birthday, boy. Man, happy birthday, my nigga Sight. We about to turn up. They finna let the Florida niggas in New York. Oh, they done fucked up.
A first-degree murder warrant was issued for Hunter, who was last seen driving a blue 2010 Nissan Altima with the tag 656YGW. A second man named Christopher Jordan was also sought for questioning, but Hunter was never arrested on that charge. He simply vanished back into Dania Beach and kept moving, and Brown's mother went public begging for someone to come forward, heartbroken in a way that no one in that neighborhood seemed willing to respond to. The case went cold. Hunter stayed free, and the bitterness between Dania Beach and Hollywood that had been simmering for years now had a body attached to it.
We don't have our sister, but yet we have one victory. That's kind of how we feel at this point.
A family overwhelmed with emotions after verdict day for a man found guilty for his role in the murder of a Miami Gardens mother.
She was just an amazing soul, you know, and it's still unbelievable that she's not here.
And she did not deserve it. She did not deserve none of this.
This 2021 surveillance video shows the moments leading up to the brutal ambush of 39-year-old Misty Hopkins as she was walking to work at her waxing studio in Miami Gardens.
They shot her in her head, in the back of her head. That's a cowardly act.
Nearly 5 years later,
there is not a single shred of reasonable doubt in this case.
there is some justice for those who love the late Hopkins.
The defendant drove his car.
James Hardwick, the getaway driver during her execution, convicted Tuesday, found guilty of first-degree murder. The state attorney's office with this statement after the verdict. Gun violence and gang violence will not be tolerated. Misty Hopkins' innocent life was too high a price to be paid so that gang members could exact revenge against others for a perceived transgression. The mother of 8 was shot and killed at this business center on Northwest 27th Avenue near 175th Street, March 19, 2021, around lunchtime. The alleged shooter, Joseph Christoph, is in prison on unrelated charges. The family confident investigators will make more arrests soon, and everyone who is involved in this heinous murder will be brought to justice.
Once judgment is cast, whether by God or by the courts, they will pay a price.
2 years later, in January 2013, 2 men from Dania Beach walked into an Exxon station in Hollywood and tried to rob it at gunpoint. Their names were Corey Miller, 23 years old, and Joshua Summertime, 19-year-old Josh Stewart, known on the street as Josh Summertime. A homeless man named Hasib Kurik, who had been helping out at the station that night, spotted the 2 men putting on masks behind the building and ran inside to warn the clerk, a 45-year-old named Leonard Carr. Carr armed himself and was ready when Miller and Stewart came through the door. Shots were exchanged and Corey Miller was hit multiple times, dying at the scene. Stewart ran, but was caught blocks away by Hollywood police. Under Florida's felony murder rule, Stewart was charged with his own partner's death because it happened during a crime he was committing. This meant he was looking at life in prison at 19 years old, despite the fact that it was the clerk who pulled the trigger. The clerk was never charged, as the shooting was ruled self-defense. For Dania Beach, Corey Miller's death was felt hard. He was popular there, and the fact that he died during a robbery of a Hollywood business only added to the sense that the two sides were not just rivals in some abstract street sense, but actively dangerous to each other. People were keeping score. And around 2015, that scorekeeping became organized when Eric Hunter, still free despite the outstanding murder warrant from 2011, formally built out what became known as the On-Site Gang, with himself at the top going by the name On-Site Eno. The name was deliberate. On-site meant immediate violence, no hesitation, no warning, attack on sight.
Free the guys, Glock 9, my nigga Psych, free my nigga Psych fools. You feel me? Free the guys, homie.
The gang ran a structured operation out of Dania Beach focused on home invasions, robberies, drive-bys, and building a reputation through fear and social media presence, and it included in its ranks a young rapper named Psycho Bob. In 2015, Psycho Bob was directly involved in the robbery and kidnapping of a drug dealer named Toby Barfield, alongside Hunter and other on-site members. They assaulted Barfield with a firearm, held him against his will, and forced a $30,000 ransom call to his family. Psycho Bob later confessed to his role and accepted a plea deal that gave him 5 years probation, which kept him clear of the larger federal indictment that eventually came for Hunter. That cooperation with prosecutors, quiet as it was at the time, becomes relevant later in the story because it was not the only time someone on the Dania Beach side chose to deal with the government rather than take their chances at trial. Hunter himself would eventually do the same thing on a much larger scale. When federal investigators finally built the RICO case against On-Site in 2021, Hunter turned state witness and confessed to 14 separate crimes, including the 2011 murder of Dijon Brown, the very murder that had started this entire chain of events a decade earlier. In his confession, he reframed the motive as a personal dispute rather than retaliation for snitching, but by that point, the truth of the original motive was almost beside the point. The decade of violence that followed had long since taken on a life of its own.
I got tired of being jail on the castle. All my niggas heard about. All my niggas ain't get pinned. Violence done, I'm fucking ready. Do what it sound like. Do what it sound like when the voice crying. Do what it sound like when the voice crying. Put it up my mind, put it up my mind. I'm putting it up my mind. Do what it sound like when the voice crying. Do what it sound like when the voice crying. Do what it sound like when the voice crying.
The modern phase of this beef, the part where mothers start dying, begins in 2020 when Psycho Bob walked out of prison with a Kodak Black label deal and a much higher profile than he had going in. When Psycho Bob came home from prison in 2020, he came back to a neighborhood that had not gotten any quieter in his absence and to a rivalry with Hollywood and Liberia that had only grown more personal. His connection to Kodak Black, who himself was one of the most recognizable names to come out of Broward County, gave Psycho Bob a level of visibility that his rivals apparently viewed as a threat worth responding to immediately. In September 2020, a young woman named Janice Lewis was shot and killed by people from the Hollywood side while they were actively hunting for Psycho Bob. She was not a gang member, had no role in the beef, and was not a target herself, but she was close enough to the wrong people at the wrong moment, and she paid for it with her life.
Yeah, and late tonight, Lauderhill investigators confirmed that one of the people injured and shot in this shooting is a rapper by the name of Psycho Bob, and Psycho Bob has been active, we've seen on social media tonight. Meanwhile, we are hearing from those good Samaritans who stopped to help get those victims to the hospital.
A dangerous roadway shooting in broad daylight in Lauderhill.
Hill. 3 men shot and injured, and late Monday night, Lauderhill investigators confirming.
When I looked him in his eyes, I know who that is.
We spoke to the Good Samaritans who were driving by right after the gunfire erupted, recognized the rapper, and stopped to help.
We just seen like the accident. I seen the guys getting out of their car, blood gushing out of them. It was just really traumatic to see.
Tristan was the one who drove them to the hospital.
I could hear one of the guys, like, you could hear the blood in his throat, like, as he's talking. So I'm trying to hurry up and get there.
According to Lauderhill investigators, someone in a black car started shooting at them while they were driving near State Road 7 and Sunrise Boulevard. The driver of the tan car tried to get away from the gunfire and in the process ended up crashing into other cars.
When the tan vehicle came to arrest, the black vehicle caught up to the tan vehicle and began shooting again at the occupants of the tan vehicle. The occupants of the tan vehicle at some point engaged in an exchange of gunfire with the black vehicle.
At that point, the black car sped away. Police are still looking for that black car and the people inside it.
A month later, in October 2020, a man named Sigmund Brown, known on the street as Liberia Sig, allegedly showed up at the home of Psycho Bob's mother, Dorothy Smart, and shot her. She survived, but the message embedded in that shooting was unmistakable. The people on the Hollywood and Liberia side were willing to go after his family, and they were willing to do it at her front door. Then, on January 22, 2021, Psycho Bob's close friend Marquis Florence was shot and killed in a targeted ambush, allegedly by HMT Trey and Liberia Sig, with 2 other associates of Psycho Bob shot at in the same attack, though they survived. Florence's killing is the moment most people who have followed this story closely point to as the trigger for everything that came after, because it pushed Psycho Bob past whatever restraint he had been maintaining and into a very public, very personal campaign of psychological warfare against his rivals. This meant going live on Instagram, releasing diss tracks, and making the most provocative and family-directed statements he possibly could. He released a song called Stepdaddy, in which he claimed to have slept with Liberia Sig's mother, and he went online to make sure everyone understood he meant exactly what he said. What made this particularly dangerous was not just the disrespect embedded in the lyrics, but the fact that it was coming from a man whose own mother had already been shot at, who had already watched an innocent woman get killed in the crossfire around him, and who was still choosing to escalate rather than pull back. On the street, going after someone's mother in that way carries consequences, and those consequences arrived on March 19, 2021.
Man, this motherfucking 50 bitch. Fucking real woman. When flexing go wrong. Nah, fuck that. I'm gonna take this motherfucker. Help him stay. Fuck all that. I can't shoot at a nigga tonight cause I'm too clean. I ain't shit. Everything looking good, bro. Shit looking good. Fuck. Y'all tell my brother Tight to Snipe get out the motherfucking car and take some pictures with me, man. Tell her get out the car and take some pictures with me, man. You know what I'm saying?
Misty Wiltshire Hopkins was 39 years old and had built a real life for herself. She was a mother of 8 children, including a 2-year-old at the time of her death, and she owned a successful waxing and laser hair removal salon called Hair Free at the Clearview Business Center on Northwest 27th Avenue in Miami Gardens. She had recently launched a trucking company on top of that. Friends described her as the kind of person who was always available for the people she loved, the one who showed up and made everyone around her feel supported. Her family called her a role model. She had no criminal history, no gang affiliations, no involvement in the violence circling her son. Her only connection to any of this was that HMT Trey was her son. Around lunchtime on March 19, 2021, Misty Hopkins was walking back to her salon from lunch and was on the phone with a friend when a man in a black hoodie appeared in the second-floor hallway outside Hair Free. Her friend heard her say through the phone, "Wow, oh, you scared me. What are you here for?" and then heard the gunshots. She was shot multiple times, including in the head and in the back, and died right there in the hallway. The shooter did not rob her, did not take anything, and walked out of the building and fled west across Northwest 27th Avenue. Surveillance cameras captured her final moments, confirming the targeted, deliberate nature of the attack. Miami Gardens police opened a tip line through Crime Stoppers offering a $5,000 reward and appealed publicly for witnesses. However, the case sat unsolved for over a year while Misty's family gave interview after interview, trying to understand how someone could walk into a business center in the middle of the day and execute a woman whose only offense was raising a son those people disagreed with.
I never did no shit like this, but I feel in my heart she the one. I'm so fucked up about this girl. I wish I was her first and only. But you know, I don't even care who got her first or last. That's all me now. But the day I'm getting on one knee just to show this girl another side of me, you feel me? When I first met her though, I told her like, I'm gonna do right by her. She said, prove it. So I started talking and showed her by action, you know. Niggas always talking and shit, you know, females don't want to hear all that talking because they can say anything. They can be like, I'm gonna do right, I'm gonna do this, and at the end of the day just fuck up. Feel me? So a big want to see by action, man. Like, loyalty is an action word, love is an action word. You can say I love you and then don't show love. You can say I'm loyal, but don't show it. So it's like, bitch, show me by action. So now you can take the ride and do what you finna do. Tired.
Finally, in April 2022, investigators arrested a 27-year-old man named James Hardwick and charged him with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Hardwick was not the shooter, but the getaway driver, identified as a paid participant in the ambush. The alleged shooter, a man named Joseph Christophe, was already incarcerated on separate, unrelated charges at the time and would face prosecution for Hopkins' murder at a later date. On December 17, 2025, James Hardwick was convicted of first-degree murder after a trial in which prosecutors told the jury there was not a single shred of reasonable doubt. Miami-Dade State Attorney Catherine Fernandez Rundle stated after the verdict that Misty Hopkins' innocent life had been paid as too high a price for other people's gang business. Misty's sister told reporters that whoever ordered this had to be some kind of devil, and her family made clear they would not consider the case truly resolved until the shooter himself faced charges. While Misty Hopkins was being mourned by 8 children, Psycho Bob went to a mall and in a filmed confrontation taunted HMT Trey directly about his mother's death. Within weeks of Misty Hopkins' murder, the shooting attempts on Psycho Bob intensified. On April 26, 2021, he and 2 associates were driving in Lauderhill along North State Road 7 when a black BMW and a beige minivan boxed their car in from both sides. Gunfire came from multiple directions. Psycho Bob's group returned fire, and their car eventually crashed into traffic while the BMW pulled up for another pass before fleeing. All 3 men in Psycho Bob's vehicle survived with non-life-threatening wounds. He posted on Instagram shortly after downplaying the whole thing, saying nothing happened to him, and then continued dissing. In September 2021, his close associate Wiz the Wizard, real name Wisdom Williams, was found beaten and decapitated near an abandoned home in Hallandale Beach, a murder that has never been officially solved. And on December 15, 2021, HMT Trey allegedly drove to Psycho Bob's house and shot it up, though no one inside was hurt. Through all of this, Psycho Bob kept posting, kept dissing, and kept escalating. In early 2022, he was arrested on a federal firearms charge after being pulled over while speeding with a gun in the car and was sentenced to roughly 5 years in federal prison. He was still locked up when his mother was shot dead in her driveway. Dorothy Smart, 52 years old, was known in her Fort Lauderdale neighborhood simply as Dee Dee, and every account from the people who lived near her describes the same kind of woman: warm, friendly, generous, the sort of neighbor who made a street feel like a community. She, like Misty, had no criminal history, no gang affiliations, no involvement in the violence circling her son. Her only connection to any of this was that HMT Trey was her son.
No. Oh, cranky guys! We have ran across an Australian black warhol. Australian black hole. It's amazing. It's amazing black hole. Look at the amazing black hole. Back up, get him. Wait, let me see. Get him. I know you can get him. Oh, bitch, I thought he still was in the car. Come on, man.
Around lunchtime on March 19, 2023, Misty Smart was sitting in the driver's seat of her van in her own driveway when someone approached and opened fire, shattering the back windows of the vehicle and hitting her multiple times. Fort Lauderdale Fire Rescue pronounced her dead at the scene. Nothing was robbed from her or from the vehicle. The attack, like the one that killed Misty Hopkins 2 years earlier, was purely targeted, executed in the middle of the evening on a residential street, and carried out by people who knew exactly who they were going to and exactly what they intended to do when they got there. Psycho Bob was notified of his mother's death from inside federal prison, where he almost certainly had no ability to attend her funeral or grieve in any of the ways a person would normally grieve. On social media, the mockery came quickly from the other side. People posted phrases like "Long live missing" under photos of Dorothy Smart. Inside private Telegram group chats, members of the DHB gang tracked her death the same way they apparently tracked all of their targets, with emojis, a granny symbol used to represent elderly victims, cataloged alongside the others in what investigators would later describe as organized kill counts. One of the gang's members, a man named Jared McCabe, who went by Hatch, went live on Instagram to celebrate Dorothy Smart's murder, apparently unconcerned that federal investigators might one day be watching. That Instagram live became a piece of evidence in the indictment that eventually brought down 8 members of the gang.
Hey, you want some head?
I gotta go to work. I can't fuck up no more.
You sure?
Do it for TikTok.
I ain't gonna do it.
Do it for TikTok.
I ain't gonna do it.
Do it for TikTok.
I ain't gonna do it.
Do it for TikTok.
For over a year after Dorothy Smart's murder, the case sat without arrests, just as Misty Hopkins' case had sat for over a year before James Hardwick was picked up. Then, on January 20th, 2024, a 17-year-old high school football player named Terrence Farrington Jr. was shot and killed in the parking lot of a Plantation Best Buy. His family described him as a loving, energetic kid with everything in front of him. He was not the intended target and was killed because he was in the wrong place, a case of mistaken identity in the middle of a gang dispute that had nothing to do with him. But his death left behind something that would crack the entire case open, a fingerprint on a vehicle connected to the shooting that belonged to Sigmund Brown, known as Liberia Sig, one of the leaders of the DHB gang. That fingerprint kicked off an investigation by the Broward Sheriff's Office Gang Investigations Task Force that, beginning in February 2024, started pulling together years of unsolved violence into a single coherent picture. What investigators found when they seized phones and dug through telegram chats was not just evidence of individual murders, it was the infrastructure of an organized criminal enterprise that had been running a coordinated killing campaign across Broward County for years, tracking victims, planning hits, and celebrating the results in group messages with the casual confidence of people who did not believe they would ever get caught. The violence in the weeks surrounding Dorothy Smart's murder illustrated just how far things had gone. On December 20th, 2023, DHB members Sigmund Brown, Kevaris Johnson, and Vondarius Davis conspired to murder a rival and fired more than 60 shots into a building to do it, grazing an innocent woman named Bilnia Irvin, who happened to be nearby. That attack had been planned in detail over Telegram, as investigators would later confirm. Then, in January 2024, the killing spree that would ultimately lead to their arrest unfolded in the space of 2 weeks. On January 13th, Kevaris Johnson and a 16-year-old named Raja Roll fired into a vehicle targeting a rival and instead shot a 5-year-old girl named Serenity Smith and another woman named Derica McLeod, neither of whom had anything to do with any of this. On January 20th came the Best Buy murder of Terrence Farrington Jr., carried out by Brown, Johnson, and a man named Gerard Charles, who also attempted murders on 2 bystanders in the same parking lot. On January 28th, Johnson and Roll murdered a man named Johnny Henderson in a drive-by in Miramar and wounded his girlfriend, Fancy Clark, in the same attack. 4 separate shooting incidents in 15 days, with a child among the victims, all while these men were still posting on social media and communicating through Telegram as though none of it would ever catch up to them. On November 13, 2024, the Broward Sheriff's Office and the State Attorney's Office announced the arrest of 8 DHB gang members on a 33-count indictment that covered 8 first-degree murders, 19 attempted murders, racketeering conspiracy, firearms offenses including machine gun possession, and communications charges tied to the planning and celebration of specific murders. The 8 defendants were Sigmund Brown, Kevaris Johnson, Gerard Charles, Vondarius Davis, Tyreek Jackson, Jared McCabe, Trayvon Key, and Raja Roll, who was 16 years old when he committed several of the offenses he was charged with and was prosecuted as an adult. 4 of them, Gerard Charles, Tyreek Jackson, Trayvon Key, who we know as HMT Trey, and Sigmund Brown, were specifically charged with Dorothy Smart's first-degree murder, with the indictment framing the killing as an act carried out to advance the interests of the gang. HMT Trey was charged in Count 1 with the murder of Wiz the Wizard, whose decapitated body had been found in Hallandale Beach back in September 2021. Dorothy Smart was Count 6. The Best Buy murder of Terrence Farrington Jr. was Count 7. The phones and telegram accounts pulled from arrested members laid it all out with a completeness that investigators described as rare. Kill counts tracked with coded emojis, celebration messages sent immediately after murders, Instagram lives broadcasting the mockery openly, and detailed planning conversations for specific attacks, all preserved on the defendants' own devices as though they intended to keep a record. As of early 2026, no trial verdicts have been reported in the DHB case. The proceedings remain active in Broward County courts. What started with a robbery at a nightclub in 2011 ended with 2 mothers dead, one in the hallway of her business and one in the front seat of her van, neither of whom had ever raised a weapon against anyone. Misty Hopkins left behind 8 children, the youngest of whom was 2 years old when she was killed. Dorothy Smart left behind a son who got the news from a prison cell and could not be there to say goodbye. James Hardwick, the getaway driver for Hopkins' murder, was convicted in December 2025 and will spend the rest of his life in prison. Joseph Christophe, the man alleged to have actually pulled the trigger, remains incarcerated on other charges and has not yet faced trial specifically for Hopkins' murder. The 4 men charged with Dorothy Smart's death are awaiting trial. What do you think about this case? How far do you think these gangs would go before they realize that none of the things they are fighting for is worth more than being alive and free? Let me know what you think in the comments section. Also, click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this. See you in the next one.